the
You were very instrumental.
Scouts, and this Saturday is gonna be what, my 14th breakfast. I got the Scouts to do that fundraiser 14 years ago, and they're still doing it. And they follow through. That's awesome.
That's a great thing.
That is. It's funny.
Thank you for helping.
Bob, Daddy.
You tell me when to go.
How you doing?
Sooner or later, man, I'm good. Sooner or later, they can put that flood mark in place. I'm Bob. Larry, how are you?
Is Tom coming?
Well, let me know when we're close.
I don't know if they.
I just don't want to buy any
Call
sooner
meeting
than I
order
have to.
promptly
Get
at,
a year from now.
6 o'clock. We have one, we're kind of be prompt here, Mr. Daddy, but Mr. Farmer, Board Member Farmer is en route. He's had some health challenges, so I understand if he may be a little late, but I think we can begin without him, if that's okay with everybody. Everybody all right with us starting out? So this is the April 23rd, 2014 meeting of the Ojai Building Appeals Board, and the first item would be the roll call.
Board Member Daddy.
Here.
Board Member Hilgers. Board Member Farmer. Chair Wyrick.
Here.
Board Member Hanson.
And let's see. I think I'll have Mr. Daddy. Mr. Daddy, why don't you do the Pledge of Allegiance for
Please
us?
join me
Yeah.
in the salute to our flag. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Standard notice, if anybody wishes to speak on the specific agenda items, please fill out a speaker card. We're pretty relaxed here with the Building Appeals Board, but it would be a good idea to follow that procedure. But in addition to that, the first item is public communications. If anybody has an issue that they'd like to address to the Building Appeals Board other than scheduled agenda items, these, of course, are maybe briefly discussed, but are generally referred to staff and are placed on a subsequent agenda. So is there anyone that wishes to speak under the public communications section of our agenda? I think we'll just take a little interlude here if Tom's coming in. And we may, is he going to come in this way? Yeah, good. Thank you. All right. And you're looking much better there, Mr. Farmer.
Yeah, finally, 90 days attached to that wheelchair. Okay.
So we have, I think we can change the roll call to reflect Mr. Farmer's presence. We've had roll call and Pledge of Allegiance and discussion of public communication and speaker cards, so you haven't missed anything.
Oh, good.
Other than the preliminaries. The first, there are two consent items on the minutes. I'm going to take them separately in case anybody on the board has any specific comments. First is the minutes of the Building Appeals Board meeting on February 12th, 2014. Do any board members have any comments on the minutes for just that one, February 12th? All right, let's move on. If there are not, then I'll entertain a motion for them to be approved. Dale Hanson has made the motion.
I'll second it.
Second, all in favor? Dale Hanson.
Second.
Mr. Farmer? Everybody, any objection? No. All right, so we'll just consider it passed. All right, let's move on to the special joint meeting of the Ojai City Council and Building Appeal Board minutes of March 25th. I believe the council has already considered and approved the minutes, but I believe it's appropriate for us to look at them as well, since we were participants in the meeting. Are there any comments?
Well,
Ms. Hanson?
I recall a different set of remarks from Craig Beam. I don't exactly know what he said, but I don't recall his said that the ordinance needed to be adopted. And I don't know if anybody else has any remembrance about that.
Mr. Daddy?
Actually, I think it was the opposite. I think that what he said was that it would have no bearing in a wildfire, and went on to elaborate on his home in San Diego. So I don't think that he was in support. I think that he actually said in opposition or no bearing whatsoever, not support as is down here.
That's,
Yeah, I actually watched the video today, and in preparation, and he used the words precisely, that this ordinance would quote-unquote do nothing meaningful. That he thought what was meaningful was the hardening of structures and everything. So I just think that, as stated in the minutes, his statement is not accurate. How should we handle this? Okay, and she can maybe listen to the video again and correct that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
You can approve them as amended
So, and how have we amended them?
to reflect the correct statement.
Okay, so I'll entertain a motion to that effect.
okay, I'll make a motion. I make a motion that we approve the minutes as corrected.
Second.
All right, all in favor? All right, no need for roll call. Thank you. All right, let's proceed, let's proceed with the next agenda item. We wanted to, for some time, to hear from Mr., Basia? Basada, okay, sorry. I'm kind of going to be like others on on boards and commissions and council sometimes here. My name is enough of a problem for people. But anyway, we've been looking forward to getting a report from you, sir. And we wanted to run you on the first agenda item because we don't want you to have to sit through all of our other discussion.
I
And,
appreciate that.
We're really interested in what you might have to say, and then have a short Q&A with us.
Okay, great. Thanks for having me, and thanks for putting me first.
All right.
How do you say your last name? Just kidding.
Wyrick. Yes,
Wyrick.
exactly. Wyrick. It's Wyrick a lot for a lot of part of the world, but it's
Right. I
for some
understand.
reason we call it Wyrick. I don't know why.
All right. Well, as you know, I'm the ombudsman for the second dwelling unit compliance program. It's quite a mouthful. And I've been doing this since November of last year, 2013. And I have had 6 people come to me, which doesn't really sound like a lot. But that has taken up a fair amount of time when someone does come to me. And I'm actually not even certain how many of those 6 actually came through, but I know that a couple have and actually went through the process with the city. As you might imagine, my position sort of has to do with working with and getting people through a process to feel safe about coming to the city and getting their second dwelling units approved. And with some of those people, it's gone rather quickly, and with some people, it's been fairly drawn out and taken up quite a bit of time. And I sort of say that from a standpoint of somebody who works full-time, and so that extra time at the end of a day or on the weekend adds up for me. But I do feel fortunate that I haven't been deluged by the response, which I thought might happen. But it's really been quite doable. One of the things I've noticed with people is them needing to trust this process. And so I sort of act to quell their fears and kind of convince them to go through with this. And some people readily take to the idea. They don't doubt what I'm telling them, and some people take a little bit longer to understand it. And when I tell them that City Hall has been bending over literally backwards to help get people through the process, some people don't really believe that at first. But ultimately, with the ones I've worked with, they go through with it. The ones who haven't gone through with it, out of the whopping 6, have been, there may be something that that isn't working for them in the moment and might work at some future time when maybe you know, the city changes the requirements, or one person's situation was just so marginal that they would never have gotten it through under the program as it exists. One big item of concern for people has been the sewer hookup, which is, of course, not connected to the city. So a couple people have had to, well, one person that I can think of off the top of my head was very willing to pay the $17,000 hookup fee, but other people, that gives them pause. In the case of one person, for example, though, he didn't really know if he was hooked up to the sewer or not, and it came to light that he actually had a septic tank for the unit in question. And as a recent owner, he didn't really know that. So that was really good news for him.
For now.
Yeah, for now, exactly.
Rick, so that person hadn't hooked up to the sanitation district?
No,
Okay.
no. They had 2 septic tanks in their dwelling and on their property. So,
You mentioned the 17,000.
well, that was for another.
Okay, but that
property.
one, for the 17,000,
Mhm.
was that in addition to the sanitation? Had they already come up with the amnesty program? Had they come forward on the amnesty program to the sanitation district that they put forth here about 3-4 years ago?
Well, if I understand you correctly, the one property that I dealt with
Mhm.
where they needed to hook up, or I mean they had hooked up illegally, but now in order to come into compliance, they need to pay this
Okay.
hookup fee.
So they didn't come forward when the sanitation district had offered the amnesty program? That
No,
particular party
no.
didn't come forward?
No, they
Okay.
didn't.
All right,
And they may well have been concerned that
yeah.
their dwelling would have come into question, and maybe they had concerns about that. But no, they didn't.
Okay.
And I'm actually not aware of that myself, so that's
You're not aware of
interesting. I wasn't aware of that earlier.
Oh, okay.
amnesty.
Yeah. Are you aware of the people that you go out to, Rick? Are you aware of the people who have hooked into the sanitation district legally and those who have not hooked into it?
Let's see, am I? I have a list.
The list is who have been hooked up already.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, what I'm trying to do with my position is not perform every single task. What I'm trying to do is I'll go through with the people, the interested parties, and usually there's a couple questions hanging out there, and so I'll interact with usually Sherry, who then interacts with Kathleen and other people, and finds out the answer to these questions, and I sort of go back and forth with the interested party until we sort of get to this point where we're ready to launch. And
What
then
seems to be
they
the
come
biggest
in.
concern of,
For people?
yeah,
Well, I would say the trust issue, convincing them that it's okay and it's not going to come back on them.
okay.
And usually, by the time they work with me for a little while, I think they get that. And at a certain point, they're so invested in it, I think they just want to take the leap of faith. And like I said, I have a range of people. There's no consistency to this. It's always different. The one guy who was the most difficult to convince, we went back and forth, and I even, I went through a lot of trouble for him, and I was glad that he went through with it. But we get to a certain point, and then they contact the city, and then an inspector goes and checks out the property. But that moment is very difficult for people because they're afraid, you know, that if there's something we missed, that
So
they're
after
gonna get
you
in
go
trouble.
out, then there's an inspector that goes out afterwards?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
I kind of set it up, and then the city kind of takes over from there. So I'm not, my role is not totally comprehensive. It's, I'm a bridge, and then I get it to a certain point, and, you know, they launch. It's like giving birth to a child sometimes.
Chair, could I ask,
Daddy.
could I ask a point here?
Mr. Daddy.
Would it be easier for you to go through your whole presentation and have us take notes and come back and hit these? Or is it something
No.
where you'd like us to ask during the presentation so we're right at that moment? What would you prefer?
Well, I don't really have all that much to deliver, and so let me just make a couple more points, and then you guys
Sure.
can just
Maybe we can,
ask away.
yeah.
Let me just look at my notes here. One problem, I suppose you could say, which is not anybody's fault, but it's something that comes up, is the lack of historic records on some of these properties. Because mind you, some of these properties go back a ways. And so I'll come to the city and there's no record. So then we have to go to the county. That's happened with two different things. And I personally went to the county on one of them, to the assessor's office. And so, you know, that's just a fact. That's one difficult thing or problem. One thing that people really like, and this is a major point of convincing for people, is the low rate structure that they're being charged to legalize their dwellings. That really pushes them over into the positive side. Another thing that I bring up to them a lot is how helpful the city is, and I only say that because it's really true, and that helpfulness comes from Sherry. She's very helpful to me, and then I sort of communicate that through my own belief that everything's okay. And one thing that people will ask me sometimes is, well, you know, what if somebody comes back on me? Like what if I have a building inspector come over and he finds something so wrong that, you know, I'll get in trouble. And I say, well, that's not supposed to happen. And if that were to happen, I said there would be a lot of upset people at the city, you know, probably people like yourselves, and certainly certain city council members that would definitely be upset about that. So that and the price are very big convincers for people.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I think that pretty much covers it, but no doubt if you ask me some questions, I can fill in some more.
I bet there will be some.
I'm sure.
You want to start, we'll start right and go left, Mr.
Right,
Daddy?
works for me. I've got a couple. One of my basic concerns is what these things look like in the safety. Having smoke alarms, you know, not having extension cords running around, you know, tapping off of gas lines, water heaters for running lines for cooking, for heating, basic clearance when we have pot-belly stoves and these things, wood-burning stoves, just a number of things where there's just, I have a fire checklist I look at when I go look at things. And I'm just wondering, what is your overall evaluation of the units? Were they, I don't want to use some, you know, derogatory words, but are they fairly up to just basic safety?
Oh, definitely. In fact, I've really been surprised at the quality of the ones I've seen. And mind you, I have not made site visits to all of them because in some cases it wasn't necessary. But in 3 or 4 of the cases, I did go look, and I was instantly looking at it and thinking, oh, well, this isn't going to have any problem. I mean, you think you're going to go look at a chicken coop maybe. But no, these are, I mean, there was one I looked at where I'm like, this looks like this has been here for a really long time. I mean, the house was built in 1915, and it ended up that the dwelling in question was built in the 40s, I think. And but it looked very substantial, and so that's often what I see. And the one that might be described more as a chicken coop, that woman never even came to the city. She just didn't take it any further at that time.
And I'm going to put out this question for reference. We can answer it later, maybe Mr. Stewart, but we didn't require permits in Ojai prior to 1947 for any buildings. And so when we establish what that is, I'm wondering why we would be looking at any structure at all in the city for permit prior to 1947. So just as a reference, we can go back and we can vet that that time frame, because we've had this discussion in this hall with a number of things a number of times in the last 10, 15 years.
Oh, interesting.
Heidi Whitman, who was one of our planners, brought that up half a dozen years ago when we were talking about a certain number of these. And then workload. Do you see the need to get a couple more people in the future? Because there will be a time frame eventually. There will be some limits, some time limits.
Right.
And what I would hate to have happen is you do 6, and there are literally hundreds of these things.
Oh, I know. Well, that's what I was afraid of in the beginning. I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. And I probably would have demanded as much as I could have. I would have said, you need to get more ombudsmen. But as it is now, it's just fine. But you're right. If the load were to double or triple, I would have a hard time keeping up with that myself. But right now, it's fine, perfect.
Board Member Hilder?
Of the 2 people who've continued through the process, completed it, except for the sewer hookup, do you have any idea of what the cost has been for them?
Well, I know that at least in the beginning, or maybe thus far, it's been nothing in some cases, I think, to encourage people. Some of the places are so old that it's based on the permit fees in that time,
Right.
and that literally blows people's minds. I know, again, the city has just bent over backwards to make it a low price. I mean, it's almost ridiculous.
Right. But those people pretty much didn't have any major repairs to do?
Well, I don't know.
Oh.
See, that's not my purview.
Oh.
The building inspector would come in, and I mean, they try to go easy. You know, we try to establish out the door that it's probably okay. But that doesn't mean that they're not going to find something, and they might have to fix it, or they might have to put in smoke detectors, or
Right.
or pull out the extension cord, or
So
and,
you're-
and the whole thing is it's mostly about safety.
Right.
I mean, for the purpose of the amnesty, I mean, the building code is definitely being, bent. So,
Right. And of the people who start to come forward but then drop back out, those people probably will never come forward again, it seems.
well, the people who haven't they had their own personal issues
Right.
going on, so it's not really fair to say that they didn't come forward because the city wasn't, being lenient enough or
right.
so. It really had nothing to do with that. I don't think. And there's 2 people like that out of the 6.
Right.
And I think there's been 3 people that have come forward. So, yeah, 3 went through with it. 2 did not go through with it because I think they had their own issues. And one told me the other day, this one also took a lot of time, that, well, see, they weren't qualified on the setback. It was a 4-foot setback. And so the guy said, oh, we really appreciate your help, and we're waiting. We've gotten word that, this might change, this setback rule, and we might qualify. So that one's just sort of hanging out there.
A quick follow-up. Was that a conversion of an existing building on a 4-foot setback? Or was that built without a permit on a 4-foot setback?
That was built without a permit on a 4-foot setback, and interestingly, by a very well-known Ojai contractor. I can't figure that one out. Unless the law changed somewhere down the line.
No.
No.
Board Member Hilger, did you have?
Well, you know who this is.
Let's
We've had to remove some walls and.
let's be careful not to betray any
They
identities.
just make an error.
Yeah.
Okay.
Board Member Hilger, did you have some other questions?
Not right now.
Okay. Board Member Farmer.
Yeah. The whole idea of this is for people to come forward.
Mm-hmm.
And what's your feeling? How do you think we could actually encourage people to come forward on this? Because it sounds like you go out, you assess it,
Mm-hmm.
you give them your thoughts, and then the city inspector comes out, and the city inspector could come up with something different than maybe that, what you would.
Yeah, you could.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, because, like I said, the whole idea of this is to encourage people to come forward.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens now with those people who don't come forward and who elects not to? Does the city inspector go out and take a look at their property from then? Or what? Or they just go away, or?
Supposed to go away.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought your question more had to do with how to get more people actually to enlist in the program.
Yeah, it is. Do you give them anything, Rick? I mean, you hand them anything, any kind of a checklist, or that they know the setbacks or
No, I
codes
do not.
or any?
I do not. What I do is I talk to them on the phone and I ask them sort of the main questions, like what's the setback, what year was it built, because there's a cutoff on that. I ask them, how do you feel? Is this a pretty substantially built place? I mean, I don't ask them if it's a chicken coop.
Right.
I sort of ascertain, I try to go through levels. I talk to them a couple times. I might do a site visit.
Mm-hmm.
And the site visit tells me a lot. I mean, I look around, I'm like, oh, okay, this looks pretty substantial. And that, so far, has been the way that the program has been handled. I mean, I'm going into a place built with 2x lumber, and I mean, it looks pretty good. It's got drywall, and so the way that the city has been running it is if it looks pretty darn good, then it's going to be okay. I mean, I keep using the word lenient, and that's literally what's been going on. And I don't say that they're not, like they're being careless or sloppy. They're just, they're not making people tear chunks out of their walls so they can inspect the Simpson ties or whatever.
Or footings, you're not looking at the footings?
No.
Yeah, good.
I mean, if there was some question that, if they walked into a place and maybe they, went downhill or something, and there was a huge crack or a big hole at the bottom, they might. But I think they're just trying to work with people and this is translated to me, and then I translate that to the people. And like I say, we go back and forth. It's not just, this isn't done totally haphazardly or anything. I mean, sometimes we might have 15 email exchanges trying to find out stuff, and then Sherry will ask questions, and she'll go, no, that'll work, that's fine. And, I mean, we do the best we can. If there was some kind of follow-up from a building inspector where they came back, if the people didn't go through, I mean, that would totally jeopardize the trust of the program.
Right.
And like I said earlier, that trust issue is the thing that I'm having to communicate more than anything.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
I got the feeling you were about to offer some wisdom as to how to increase participation.
Well, I mean, I think that there could be some kind of advertisement once in a while, and it could just be in the form of a little article about the program every now and again. I mean, I wouldn't just do it one time. Or, I mean, it could be an ad. I mean, maybe something creative could be done with it, or maybe somebody's story could be told, or a conglomeration, a kind of fiction could be told. Like, I mean, who would know?
Those are good ideas.
Yeah, I know the sanitation district, when they come out with their amnesty program, they put together a pretty good brochure. They put it in the paper, they sent it to people.
Yeah, well,
There was a handout, and it kind of explained what it was all about.
Uh-huh.
And that's a good suggestion.
Excellent idea.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Would you like to go forward, and I'll finish up? Or
Okay, most of my questions have been answered, but how did you find out about the program?
I think I saw it in the newspaper.
You saw it in the newspaper?
Mm-hmm.
And how were you prepared to do it? Just something that came natural to you?
Well, I was a general contractor.
Okay, that
Well, I
was one.
still am a general contractor, but I worked as a general contractor in Ojai and San Francisco. And I worked in I worked for several property management companies, especially in Ventura and San Francisco. So I have a feel for it. I'm on the Historic Preservation Commission,
Oh, you are?
which is related to buildings.
Right.
So I'm not a building inspector, but I mean, I certainly have a familiarity and a feel for it. And then I work for the Ojai Valley Land Conservancy, so I'm having to constantly be diplomatic with people who are difficult to deal with. So I mean, there is a diplomatic
Aspect
part
to it.
of this little
I was going to
job.
ask you, I was surprised to hear you say that you don't do a site visit on all of them. You just do mostly telephone interview and trust that they're saying
Well,
what they
I
need?
mean, in the case of a couple people, I just very quickly convinced them to go to the city, so there was no reason for me to do a site visit. Actually, the first guy who called me, he did some of the legwork, and I just communicated with him by email, and we fairly quickly got to the point where he felt safe enough to come to the city.
Okay.
Whereas other people, a lot of this has to do with people's individual characters too. Some people are more trusting, or they're just anxious to get it legalized, and other people are, I mean, it may have already been like this for so long that they're kind of questioning why do it. And then some people have actually been cheap. They don't want to pay any money. You know, whereas one guy I said, you don't mind paying $17,000? No, I'm happy to, just to get it legalized. So it's just a very broad range of personalities and histories with everyone.
Did you find that, were you able to determine in these cases, in any of these cases, these people were having the second unit for purposes of helping with the mortgage or some hardship situation?
I didn't get that, but everybody was renting them out, certainly. So I would say that they appreciated getting the income.
And did you find in each case that the owner occupied one of the units?
Oh, yeah, in all the cases, they
Okay.
did. That's one of the questions, too.
That you asked?
Yeah, there's some really essential core questions that have to be answered.
Right.
Like, if they don't have a smoke detector, I mean, I don't even ask that. I might use that as an example of what the city is looking for,
I see.
just as a contrast.
Mhm.
But most people are, I'm asking them, I mean, if the setback isn't there, then there's just no discussion. Or if it was built last year, there's no discussion. Or if they don't live there, that's not going to happen, so.
Okay, that's all. My question.
A couple just to wind things up. To your knowledge, has the sanitary district been very clear with their policy of offering time payment plans for people on these non-conforming permits?
Well, I've heard that from
Okay.
Sherry, and then I've communicated that with,
Okay.
for example, one of the people who was concerned about having to make that payment. I said, well, you could do it. They do have a time thing.
They have a standard, I think, 5 or 10 year option, I believe. Huh? Or 20 maybe, yeah. So, I mean, obviously that helps a lot.
15.
Helps a lot, yeah.
15,
And it comes out to be $150 a month.
right.
So if they're getting any more money in rent, it's $150 a month for that thing.
I just wanted to
Over
make sure that
15 years.
that option was being clearly communicated, because
Oh, yeah.
the price is a big issue.
Yes.
Do you have a sense of what era it is when the records kind of drop off in availability inside City Hall?
It seems like, this is just somewhat rough, but like the 40s, I believe.
About the time when permits were first required?
That would make sense. yeah.
Okay, all right. And then I just wanted to say that how impressed I am with your temperament and knowledge. I think you're the perfect fit for this job, so.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much for being willing to do it.
Oh, you bet.
I mean, it's a real valuable service, and of course, we're also amply compensated for this, but we do it
Right.
because we love the community, and I can tell
Right.
that's where your heart's is, and I really appreciate it.
All right, well,
Personally,
thank you. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah.
Any time.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good
Thank you so
night.
much. All right. Okay, so.
Chair, I need to make a correction to my statement.
Absolutely.
Actually, when we were talking about the RANA numbers, it was prior city manager Monty Witters that brought up the fact that permits were not required before 1947. And that will be archived on one of our recorded meetings.
At some point.
So if
Okay.
that's necessary to go through, we could identify that date.
Well, certainly, it's generally possible to determine an era from the type of construction, as I understand it. So at least it gives us a kind of a flag of, well, okay, let's look at this a little more closely if it's in that era, All right, let's move on to the next discussion item. Unless, I didn't have any speaker cards for discussion item number 3, but again, we're kind of relaxed here. If anybody had any comment from the public, it's certainly welcome it. Number 4 is the discussion and recommendation of ratification, modification, or denial of the Ventura County Fire Protection District Ordinance Number 28, Appendix L, pertaining to fire protection systems within the jurisdictional boundaries of the city of Ojai. We have a attached recommendation from, I believe, Ms. Wald. And we have had a lot of discussion about this. And again, I want to emphasize that there really are 3 choices here, to ratify without a change, modify in a way that would be less stringent, not more stringent, and I will be corrected, I'm sure, if I misstate. And then the other option is denial. I think those are our 3 options. And I thought the best way to approach this would be to first see if I know I have 1 speaker card here on item number 4. Thought we first see if we have some comments from the public, and then we can start bringing it back to the board and discussing the opinions about how to proceed on this recommendation. We have Mr. McPherson.
Hi, thank you for listening to me tonight. This issue about the fire sprinklers, I can recall back when the city council adopted it. And at the time, I think I was the only person that stood up and said, I don't think it was worthwhile. In that particular time, I was hoping that the city council would adopt requiring solar to be put on all houses, since I was the head of the then Sustainable Ojai Solar Power Group. And I was pointing out that that would pay for itself, and it would benefit, which we were forecasting global changes at the time, and also make cleaner air. And the city council said, no, we don't want to force the people to do anything. Well, then, at the same time, that was my argument, here you are forcing people to put in sprinklers. I'm familiar with sprinklers. I worked as an executive at several corporations, and every one of those corporations had sprinklers, and every one of those corporations had a fire that the sprinklers put out the fire. So I'm not burying my head and saying sprinklers don't work. But where it helped us, in every single case, was when there was nobody there. They were on weekends, at night, something happened, a plating tank evaporated everything out of it and heated it up and burned up something. All of these things happen, okay? But in a house, that's not the case. In the arguments that people say safety and all these others, I went to Bob Roper and I asked him. And I said, does this really save lives? Can you give me a number? He said, no. Now this is, of course, after he was in power, or out of power. So anyway, if you look back at this whole idea of low-cost housing, and I'm a businessman, and I've looked at it from a business perspective, and you cannot have low-cost housing if you have to buy the property. So the cheapest, or the only way you can do it without subsidizing it, is to do granny flats, or things like what you're talking about tonight. If you look at just the sewer permits, which I think is a ridiculous thing, because if it sits off a different, it's a different fee than if it was connected. And you look at just the cost of a $10,000 sprinkler system, you're already up to $40 a square foot before you even started, not including permits or anything else. You don't have any low-cost housing. So this is negating all of that stuff that was done at the state level to authorize low-cost housing, not having to go through the whole procedures they used to have. So that's one thing. The other thing is, and I notice my time's about up.
We'll be lenient, Mr.
Okay,
McPherson.
all right. The other thing is that it's not, I personally don't see how it's going to save lives. And it's a big cost item. In all the companies I worked for, we've had to go get our, every 2 years, 3 years, something like that, the system flushed. It had to be tested, all of these things. I've asked, how about these systems? No, they never get tested. So we all know we have hard water here. And we all know that if you keep that hard water in those things for a long time, when it comes time for them to work, they're not going to work. But nobody tests them. And you can ask the gentleman here tonight if that's true. Maybe it was bad information. So I see it as a waste of money. I would much rather see that money left and let the more people get on the bandwagon, as he said just a few minutes ago, cost. He was only talking about the sewer cost, not about $10,000 sprinkler systems. And that's going to shake the whole thing up. That's going to kill it. So I don't believe it should be imposed at all. If you, let's say, have a home on Sulphur Mountain, I can understand why, but it's not to save the home. It's to save the forest. Because it takes the fire department a long time to get up there. And they just want to keep it contained so it won't burn everything up. And ask them that tonight. But this idea where you can have a fire engine there in 6 minutes to require a sprinkler system for $10,000, I could certainly put that $10,000 to better use. Anyway,
Thank you.
That's it.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate Sherry getting the red blinking light, because I wanted to listen to what you had to say. Anybody have any questions or comments on Mr. McPherson? All right, we'll bring it back. Anybody else from the public wish to speak? We don't have a speaker card, but we'll just, again, entertain. There comes the speaker card.
Chair,
Yes,
Lyric,
Mr. Daddy.
maybe I could ask for leniency, since there's so few people.
Yes, I agree.
And this has got such a small scope.
I agree.
I'm just wondering.
Anybody
if-
who wishes to
If we
speak.
couldn't extend it to maybe 5 minutes or
I think
maybe a little more on a
I
subject.
agree. We sort of did that for Mr. McPherson, so I think we can go on that precedent. Mr. Ulrich, proceed.
William Ulrich, 487 Gridley Road. From a practical perspective, I've been aware over the past several months of a virtual onslaught from Ventura County Fire, and while I appreciate their interest in this, I think there's an inverse relationship between how many folks have been up here trying to be persuasive to both your body as well as other bodies that there's a relationship between this. It's basically about money. It's about money and equalization of money expended. East County, populous, growing cities, and Ojai, which is not part of the bandwagon as far as mandatory sprinklers for residential. The reality of the situation is I think these efforts, gentlemen, could be better spent towards, perhaps is certainly, since we're the only community that is virtually encircled with chaparral, in fire clearance, perhaps, enforcement thereof, rather than indicating that it is something that the city needs to enforce because you folks don't. Last time I checked, you're all part of the same county. Also, you guys provide fire service for this city, since we don't have an individual fire department, and as such, that makes it sort of a community effort. From a practical perspective, even more so, notwithstanding all of these issues that have been presented relative to the efficacy and the life safety and the bugaboo of, well, we're preserving lives, is I do not believe that it's supported either economically or from the perspective of actual statistical information. And the underlying impetus of parity with Thousand Oaks and Camarillo has been underplayed significantly. And once we go this way, where we are exceeding the state mandatory requirements, we become part of a situation that is onerous to the public. And having decades of experience dealing with various fire agencies, I'm cognizant that once committed, there is no going back. And as such, that is a revenue-generating mechanism for not only the fire agencies and associated agencies, but it is an onerous expense to the public. And I think we also have some issues relative to fire zones in this city already that have become onerous, incredibly onerous to individual homeowners, relative to 200, 300, or 400% increases in their fire insurance rates that have nothing to do with whether they're sprinklered or not. And these arbitrary determinations that are based on the impetus of agencies who will be benefiting from the collection of fees need to be looked at very carefully and constrained. And I'm sure from the perspective of staff recommendations that it has nothing to do with that. So I'd like that be considered in your deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, any other people wish to speak from the public before we bring it back to the board for deliberation? All right, I will bring it back, and I want to say, make a couple preliminary comments. One is that I want to draw everybody's attention to the recommendation from Kathleen Wald on right after the tab, blue item 4, where it stated there on the question about other parts of Ordinance 28 other than Appendix L, and the fact that, we work for the City Council, and the statement is that Mayor Strobel has asked that the Buildings Appeal Board address Appendix L independently from Ordinance 28 and other appendices. And I want to respect that in terms of this particular agenda item, but I do want to say that there was a question that I generated that Mr. Fletcher just recently answered,
that I'm still digesting since it just came yesterday. But that I do want to point out that there are some other issues here that I want to understand, but I think tonight we should, on this agenda item, just focus on that component of Appendix L, even though there may be other components to be looked at some other time that are not on this agenda. And just as a courtesy to everyone, I wanted to add, because I know Mr. Fletcher distributed his opinion about the answer to my questions, and he referenced certain Old City Council municipal code. I actually printed it out so everybody can have what you referenced as an item for reading, which states that 1920s ordinance where the city joined the fire protection district, as well as a couple of other things that are appropriate to agenda number 5, where the city actually does have some municipal code that's separate from the Ventura County Fire District Code. But we'll talk about that later when we get to agenda item number 5. So that's my chair recommendation, that we only, in item number 4, consider Appendix L per the request of the mayor. And
Can you read that request again from the mayor?
Yes. Mayor Strobel has asked that the Building Appeals Board address Appendix L independently from Ordinance 28 and other appendices. And this is from Kathleen Wald's recommendation. I mean, I'm taking that on face value, that that's what she wishes us to do. Did you have a comment on that, Kathleen?
No, I
Other
have
than
nothing.
that's just straightforward what she asked us to do?
That's my understanding, yes.
Yeah, and I can confirm that in terms of verbal discussion, and it makes a certain amount of sense. Kathleen, did you want to go through your recommendation?
I kind of agree with what you said at the beginning of it, that we've had numerous staff reports and a lot of information on this, and I'd be happy, with other staff members here to clarify any questions you have, but I think unless there's some kind of question about the staff report that's in the packet tonight, just seeks to kind of clarify some of the questions that were still outstanding. And if you don't have any questions on those, then I think we can just move forward.
Yeah, I think one of the main questions that came up was the issue of the non-conforming permits on the second unit program, and whether or not detached structures that were not legalized, were built without a permit, would be required to be fire sprinkled under the non-conforming permit. And I think you answered that as far as I can see. But that was an issue of an interpretation of the application of state fire code, not Ventura County Fire Code.
Right, I think that goes hand in hand with the question about jurisdiction and who has.
Right, which is another matter, yes. Mr. Daddy, I saw your hand up. Before we proceed.
I have a question that'll confuse everyone. On page 23.
Of the Ventura County Fire Department staff report?
Section 4.
That would be the VCFD staff report.
Right.
VCFPD, yes.
23.
Page 23, where Appendix L begins.
Okay. On page 24, when we start taking a look at exceptions.
Yes.
And so when we go to section, I just need an explanation. When we go to 3C, and when we go to 4C.
Yes.
And I look through here, it looks like we're requiring pool equipment. It looks like we're requiring other types of buildings, freestanding restroom buildings, and a number of items to have a Class A fire roof when the class standard for the entire city is the lowest roof standard in the state of California at Class C. Is that correct, Mr. Stewart? That Ojai has a Class C roof standard?
Being that we have not adopted any local amendments, that is correct.
And so it appears that the only changes we're making internally is for these other buildings, and we're going to go ahead and make them have a Class A roof. when the entire standard for the entire city is at a C. And this is the type of thing that I have been saying for years makes no sense. The other thing that makes no sense is that we require no removal of Class C roofs with a frequency of damage or replacement under 50%. So we can annually replace Class C shake wood roofs indefinitely at a 49% replacement, where we get into these other ancillary buildings, and they're going to be Class A. I see that the cost and what we're doing is so imbalanced with the bulk of the 3,500 units we have in Ojai, and only having one home in 3 years. It's going to take 10,000 years for us to get to some type of safety parity of roofs and sprinklers. And having listened to our joint meeting where there was a $2,000 cost, and I see on page 37, we talk about the O and the 1 and the R general metered service rate for a 2-inch meter of $211, which is an old meter, by the way. That's an old meter rate. I see the private fire protection service from Cal State Water, Southern Cal Water, which has long ago been changed. We're still using a 2004 standard. And what it says is the minimum diameter for private fire service connections will be 2 inches. And we see that the new rate is $273 a month. So we're looking well in excess of $3,000 just for the meter, not the installation of the upgrades. We're looking at least a few $1,000s in permits. And then when I take a look at some of the examples of what the costs are that the fire department was nice enough to get us, where I'm seeing some huge numbers, and having talked to Mr. Stewart today about asbestos mitigation and lead paint mitigation as we're doing the reconstruction, this isn't 2,000. This is 10 to 20 times more than what our council brought up and we were brought up. So I'm kind of seeing where if this is $2,000, let's force everybody to do it. When it gets to be $30,000 or $40,000, that's a huge number. The other thing that's significant is while it's only $273 a month to have a 2-inch meter in now, we know that Golden State, and we have not been able to successfully remove them to date, but we know Golden State annually has a track record of less than 10 years doubling their rates and fixed costs. So we can be sitting looking at somebody here in another 10 years having a $5,000 meter charge annually, and I think that's a significant impact. I would like us to spend our money and bulletproof and armor up our units in town with arresters, with enclosed eaves, with heat alarms inside the garages, attics, other types of things that we can do. And I would say if we decide not to do that, as I talked to Chief Lorenzen when we had a meeting, I don't think a little fire sprinkler here or a little fire sprinkler there is adequate. I think if we're going to use sprinklers at all, you come up with a dollar threshold and you retrofit the entire house. If we're truly going to make them safe, and it's truly about life safety, we go ahead and bite the bullet and we just make them comply to today's standards for any modification. It's not like a little bit pregnant. It's either we need them or we don't, and it shouldn't be a matter of, well, we can get by with $10,000 or $20,000 here. We don't want anybody to spend $50,000 here. It should be one or the other. So that's my thought.
Thank you. I just want to remind that the only options we have are to reduce
modify by reduction on specific components of Appendix L. We can't add anything without city ordinance. That's been made clear. And again, I'm going to keep looking at Mr. Fletcher to correct me if I'm wrong.
I'm sorry, yes, that's correct.
Okay, I'm figuring your silence will be assent until you pop up and say, no, you're wrong. So that's what I'm looking for. Thank you. Board Member Hanson. No, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, can I just make a
Certainly.
clarification?
Certainly.
I'm going through my code index, and we have some very high fire hazard areas in the city up next to the hill. And under state code, those would require fire-resistant roofs. But down in the valley floor would be Class C, okay?
Yeah, in
Just
fact, I looked at, what I passed out was that we have on the books right now, Chapter 3 Fire Zone, Section 9-3.01, fire zones established, that requires in a Zone 4, as defined by the Ventura County Fire District, special roof coverings, horizontal protection, and opening protections, over and above anything adopted by the Ventura County Fire District.
And that
At least
it complements the state law as well.
Right.
Those have been incorporated into the state law. And I just wanted to clarify that.
Right.
When I was answering Mr. Daddy's question, I was thinking valley floor, so I just wanted to clarify that.
Understand. And again, I don't want to get off too much on this, but I want to clarify that if we're talking about the reason why I, as chair, asked for agenda number 5 was to address specific issues like that you raised, Mr. Daddy, of things that beyond what are in the Ordinance 28 that we might find appropriate for the city of Ojai. So I don't want to get sidetracked into those issues.
Right, but I want to make everybody understand, I absolutely have no hesitancy to go above state code for climate and for topography and geography. We have some areas that need it, and we need to make some huge modifications. I'm just not comfortable with sprinklers being our only option, or the option.
Okay. Board Member Henson.
Oh, yes. Since we can modify Appendix L, my understanding, we can do that.
Yes.
And I'm looking at this and trying to be really open-minded and see both sides. I understand what the fire district is saying, and I appreciate many of the remarks, but I'm wondering in the second unit compliance program, since we're trying to keep costs down so that those people can continue to rent so we can have low-income housing, if we couldn't modify Appendix L to not impose sprinklers on second units, but maybe instead insist that they have hardwire smoke detectors or something else that, where we demand, we want those people to be protected. It's not about that, but since we've more or less determined that fire sprinklers don't save lives, I would just like to see that we can do something there to make sure they're hardwire smoke detectors, and not make them sprinkler the second units. And also, when we're talking about remodeling 1,000 square feet or 50 square feet of the existing unit, not sprinkling the entire building. If they have to do any part of it, just the new part. And I'm just wondering if we can offer that as modifying Appendix L.
Mr. Fletcher.
May you? Yes, that's what the options before you. If you want to create further exceptions, higher thresholds, that would be less stringent and therefore permissible. If you wanted to have a broader exceptions, you may do that.
Okay.
We just need to be careful about that, Mr. Chair, is that if it is a newly constructed building without the benefit of permits, then state law would take precedent on that.
Yes.
And may require fire sprinklers under state law.
On the new ones, yeah, but I'm talking about people that are trying to comply.
But what I'm saying is if a building was built without the benefit of permits or inspections and has been recently when that has been built, it would fall under current state law requirements.
Understand. Okay.
Board Member Hanson, I'm going to let everyone have an opportunity to speak,
Well,
and I'll wait, and then we'll get free form here.
The only other thing is when Bob was talking about the roof, I mean, I understand that those C standard roofs are really not safe. And what percentage must the roof, in your estimation, be damaged before the demand would be that the entire roof be replaced with an A standard?
Well, I can tell you exactly what it is. In this city, it's 50%. In other cities, it's 5%. Pasadena is 0%.
Isn't it very expensive, though, for the property owner? I mean, I understand that.
It's a lot more expensive after it burns down.
Yeah, okay.
We don't
Let's
put
also,
houses
we're getting
back,
into, we're getting into issues that are part of Agenda 5.
Okay, sorry.
So,
Okay. I'm finished.
because remember, we can't add anything, okay?
Okay.
So all we're talking about in 4 is accepting, rejecting, or reducing specific
Or modifying.
elements.
Okay.
Modification can only be by reducing stringencies, not
Yeah,
increasing.
not
So
increasing.
anything more stringent would be in 5.
Okay,
In the
gotcha.
Agenda 5, okay? I'm wondering whether we should wait for this conference to conclude. No, I'm fine. Mr. Farmer, you have something you're about ready to say? Let's continue while they will, yes. Well, we're about to find out what the discussion was about.
Well,
Is there something you need to give us some clarity on?
I
Okay.
guess I'll bring it up.
Yeah.
I'm hearing from the board here that there's a perception that all amnesty projects are going to require sprinklers. And that's not, I don't believe that's true.
That is correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is correct. If the
Yeah,
building,
there was an interpretation that I believe has subsequently been changed by the fire department that any detached structure that was not constructed legally may have to be treated as new construction. I believe that is not that interpretation. That was a may in the staff report, and that was the only.
And that still is a may. I mean, if a building owner comes in and establishes that they have built this in the last 3 years without the benefit of permits or inspections, the code at that time would require it to be fire sprinkler.
And I understand that the difference being not for 20 years ago.
Right. But if
20 years ago it would not be.
20 years ago, if we can establish that, and there's
Right.
ways that we can establish that via county assessor records or some other reasonable documentation. And we've had a number of those that we have worked with individuals,
Right.
as Rick fully indicated here.
Right.
And those were not required to be fire sprinklers.
And again, it has nothing to do with Appendix L, that's state fire code. What you're doing is saying if that code was in place when you can establish, when it was constructed, you got to apply that code to it, if that code requires fire sprinkling. And
Yeah,
I understand.
Yeah, we apply that code other than health and safety
Exactly.
issues.
Mr. Daddy. And we'll get to Mr. Farmer here.
When we talk about those, let's clearly define and state what it is. My understanding is this: anything built after 2006 is not part of the compliance program. Is that correct? It is not part of the compliance program. They don't qualify to come in. That's what my understanding was. And so since 2006 is the date,
Mr. Clark's nodding his head, so I
We
think
then
that's-
know-
Yeah, that's the current resolution, as I understand it.
we then know that anybody, according to what our discussion has been, isn't going to be included in the new city or the new state codes for the fire sprinklers as a new permit, because it is out, it's 8 years, 9 years ago, it is outside that time frame. Is that correct? Because we need to clearly establish what we're talking about. We walk around this, and when I heard the fire marshal say, and we can look at the recording, that any of these that come forward are new, are going to be new permits, and all new permits are going to require fire sprinklers. That was a definite statement. That was very clear.
No, it was a May statement. And just
Well, that was very clear
Okay.
that was going to happen. So what I would hope we would do is we'd go back and we'd take these bullet points, because as people are watching out here and figuring out if they're going to make it, they don't want to fall into the, gee, am I or aren't I, or what's going to happen, am I looking at this thing? And I'm going to make a statement. My understanding is is that if you built a building without a permit after 2006, you're not eligible for this compliance program. And therefore, all the buildings built prior to that would not be new permits. They would be at the time and what the standards were, and they would all be outside of the umbrella of the sprinklers. That's what my understanding. And I'd really like and it's okay if you correct me and I'm wrong, it's okay. I just need to know what that actual fact is
Mr.
for that
Stewart,
statement.
would you like to comment?
What you're saying is correct. Sometimes that's a little difficult to determine, and so we've tried to be a little
Right.
flexible about that.
Right.
And I don't want to arbitrarily say, no, it's not going to happen, but, unless we have some documentation showing when that was built, there is some flexibility on that. And I just don't want the board to think that it could never happen, because there may be some circumstances where it may happen.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Farmer?
Yeah, I'm a little bit confused here. So you're saying documentation of when it was built. What do you mean by documentation?
County assessor records would be appropriate, okay? Some other reasonable documentation that we have.
Building receipts or?
Possibly building receipts if it's substantial in nature. And I just don't want to qualify, these are the only things we're going to accept.
Right.
We'd have to work with the individual on that.
Right.
But there may be some circumstance where fire sprinklers may be required.
Yeah. I'm just, this second unit program, it's too bad it came up about the time that we came up with appendix, that we're looking at this, because
Wait till he's done.
I just see that, I see a big cost. And I think once people that want to come forward grasp what the cost could be on retrofitting their main, the main structure, going back and retrofitting. And I looked at one of the comments in here from one of the contractors that a retrofitting could be up to 30 to 50 or 60% of what he had estimated. I just see a huge expense. So anyway, that's.
Well, the chair's going to recognize a comment from, unless Mr. Fletcher, did you want to? And again, we're just, go ahead.
I'm just kidding. Another statement. I'm not so sure that there's any universal statement that if someone's legalizing a second dwelling unit under the program, they're going to have to, and it say it requires sprinklers, that the entire main house has to be sprinklered too. I don't know if that's at all true. I don't think it's true at all. That's why I'm hearing very broad statements by the board here. You're
Right.
concerns about the impact on the second dwelling unit program.
Right.
Yeah.
And I agree. We need to be precise here.
And
We
let
don't
me
need to
say,
right.
the law is that when you're legalizing or permitting an unpermitted structure, the building official is allowed to apply the code in effect at the time the structure was built. Now, what the evidence of when it was built sometimes is not very clear. And really, ultimately, it's the burden on the property owner to produce evidence,
Right.
substantial evidence, of when the structure was built. And if the structure was built in 1972, then the building official is entitled to apply the building code and safety codes of 1972.
Right.
That's the law. That's what will be happening. So, I think I would actually ask if the fire marshal can clarify when did they start requiring sprinklers in the city of Ojai? So we clarify for you, when we're talking about the second dwelling unit program, how far back could a building have been constructed if we applied the code when it was constructed? Would it have required sprinklers or not? Maybe Mr. Daddy has the.
Well, what I want to do
Yeah,
is.
and so I think that's
respect
an point we need to clarify.
Do you have a quick answer, Mr. Daddy? And then we have a person who'd like to comment from the audience on our discussion.
The city of Ojai, I believe, was Pat, around 2006, 2007, and we can look that up. The city went ahead and accepted the county's recommendation that all the fire sprinklers be done. And again, what I'm hearing is the question I stated and what I wanted to draw a bright line in is that we're not going to allow newer units to get in under the compliance program. That's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
And that is set at 2006. And so Mr. Stewart's and Mr. Fletcher's statements are perfectly correct. If it is newer, it falls into the state, whatever the state does, and there isn't going to be any wiggle room on that, I believe. And I don't believe that anybody can lessen the standards of the state for what those requirements are. And so that's definitive. I just don't want anybody out there in TV land to think that with a 2007 home, that they're going to get this. They're not. It's just not going to be there.
Sir, I'm sorry to make you wait, but.
No problem.
Okay, go ahead and state your name.
My name's Wayne Maynard, and
make a
I think
comment.
I live on Gridley Road. I think Mr. Fletcher just kind of addressed the issue that I just thought of, and that is that the amnesty program allows, my understanding, allows the building to be built using the codes that were in effect when it was built. Is that correct? Like you gave the example in 1975.
That's correct.
Okay, so then I guess my question is, because the fire district has had a fire sprinkler retrofit requirement since 1984, and those requirements have been in effect in the city of Ojai since then, would those whatever the fire district requirements were at the time that you determined what code was in effect, would those apply? So it might be the discussions here really are kind of mute, because you're talking about retrofitting sprinklers under the ordinance you're being asked to ratify today really doesn't affect those houses that were built prior to 2006, because it was whatever fire district ordinance was in effect at that time that's going to apply. And they did have retrofit requirements back then.
I don't have that information in front of me prior to '06.
My understanding of that requirement was at 5,000 square feet, though. And so but I don't want to get into all those details.
We don't want
I
to,
just want
that
to
is
say
really
that
irrelevant to our.
Yeah,
It's changed throughout the years.
It's changed throughout the years, and we'd have to look at it on a case-by-case basis.
Right.
But I just wanted to let the board know there's a possibility. The probability is not there, but there is a possibility.
Yeah, I mean, the core issue here, there's a couple core issues to Appendix L. One is the kicking in of having to do the entire structure when you're doing in addition to it. That's certainly one of the core structures, beyond what state fire marshal requires. And then there are a couple other things that I'm going to mention in a couple moments here. But
I just have two other comments.
Go ahead
real quick.
and finish.
That's a good point, though, Wayne. I mean, it's
Yeah.
Okay. The other thing is, I am retired from the fire district. I was before the city council and pitched the fire district ordinance many times, and when they ratified it. But to comment, fire sprinklers do save lives. There's never been a case that I'm aware of where there's been multiple fatalities in a fire sprinkler building. There have been fatalities where a person is in the room of origin probably because they're incapacitated, they can't get out. But no multiple fatalities. Fire sprinklers do save lives. And then, Mr. Daddy, with regards to your comments about the water meter costs, you said that, just want to make sure you're aware that there are no special water meter requirements for a residence. You just go off the domestic water meter. You don't put in a 2-inch meter for a residential system. And I'm not sure if that's what you were trying to identify or not.
I'm just reading the requirements from the water district.
Right.
And
Those would be
so
for
if the
commercial
water
buildings
district
typically.
may not be in tune or in touch, but what the water district is saying is that if you're going to have a sprinkler in a residential home, they're going to go ahead and upgrade you to a 2-inch water meter. And they've upgraded a lot of people to water meters. Notwithstanding,
I would ask the fire
28
district
around.
that question, because I don't think that's correct.
Well, I'm just looking at what they published
All right.
and what's in this packet from the fire department.
Okay.
I'm hoping that we can wind up the detail talk here soon. And
Yeah,
get
the 2-inch requirement is for a commercial building, not residential, and the requirement for the residential is that on the sprinkler building is that it meets the pressure requirements at the end for the sprinkle. It meets that pressure test.
And since you're here, the 2-inch requirement is my understanding because of the
need under commercial NFPA for all sprinklers to go on at the same time, as opposed to residential, just 2 at a time? Larry?
Each sprinkler is independent based on the heat and fire area.
Okay, well, I was under the understanding that the explanation for why commercial required a separate tap and residential does not require a separate tap had to do with the number of sprinkler heads being able to be fed simultaneously.
Might have to do more with the square footage of a commercial building versus a residential and the content within
All
the
right,
commercial.
we better, I have been told different.
They haven't been told
Okay.
that name.
Okay, go ahead.
I have been told very precisely it has nothing to do with the square footage. It has to do with the fact that under commercial ratings, you have to be able to supply more heads simultaneously than you do under residential.
I used to do plan checks for fire sprinkler systems. The design requirement for a residence is 2 sprinkler heads.
Exactly.
The underlying design. The
Exactly.
design requirement for commercial varies,
Back
but
in the
typically
day.
it's 1,500 square feet. You have to provide a sufficient water supply
Right.
to cover enough sprinkler heads that'll cover 1,500 square feet, which is typically around 10 sprinkler heads.
Right.
So, but it's
And
all.
so
all
I
has to
wasn't
do with
completely
design.
wrong in what I said.
Yeah.
All right, it
Close.
does have to do with the number of heads that have to be able to be operating at the same time.
Correct. And
Is
for
why-
residents, the design is 2 sprinkler heads. For commercial, it's 1,500 square feet.
Right. Is why the
Approximately.
separate fire tap's required. Okay. I just want to make sure I wasn't wrong on that, because I had a very long discussion one day with Mr. Aragi, and learned a lot. And that's one of the things I got into a big discussion with him about, because obviously that's a significant issue in terms of cost, having to have a separate tap for commercial that's not required for residential. Board Member Hanson?
I'm fine.
Okay. All right. I think we're kind of at this, I believe we're at the stage here where perhaps it's appropriate for us to talk about where we stand as individual board members on whether on the 3 options of ratifying, denying, or modifying. I would like to just, since it's my turn to speak, make a couple comments. One is, I think that the documentation supplied by the fire department tracks pretty much everything else I've seen, that the cost of retrofitting fire sprinkler systems runs 2, 3, 4 times, starts about twice the cost of new construction and goes up from there. It can get into triple the cost quite easily. And so that inherently, in my mind, puts a different analysis on retrofit compared to new construction. Just because any policy consideration is a matter of trade-off. And I know that safety is involved, but also any policy analysis needs to be rational in the sense of looking at these trade-offs. I have I want to make a pointed comment. The cost of perfect safety is infinity. None of us wants to exist in a daily world with perfect safety. It's a matter of what's reasonably safe. And in my mind, the much different cost implications for retrofitting compared to new construction is a factor in my thinking. The next thing I want to state in terms of the possibility for modification is that Appendix L is not just about fire sprinkler requirements on retrofitting. There also are some issues in Appendix L having to do with, and I'll go through them. For example, in L-103.1 additions, it states any existing building with less than 701 square feet of floor area previously exempt from fire sprinklers that would have been required to mitigate fire flow, access requirements, or distance to fire station, at the time the building permit was issued, shall provide the fire sprinklers within the entire building when any addition to the building brings the total square footage over the previous exempt amount, regardless of the percent of the addition. No minimum threshold. As I read that, that becomes an issue beyond fire sprinklers, where you're basically saying, if you have a small building, you can have an extremely minor addition to it, and you're going to kick in, having, as I read that, having to do the whole building regardless of the percent of the addition. And I just want to state for the record that in my mind, that raises the possibility of having a minor percentage. So it's reasonable, maybe 5 or 10%, if the sense of this board for what we're doing tonight, which is just recommending to council. We're not making a decision, we're just recommending to council. That's a possibility of a modification in my mind. Going on, and again, this is in addition to what State Fire Marshal requires. Let's always remind ourselves of that. This is an additional to State Fire Marshal standards. So another point I wanted to make on modifications is that L 104.1.1 states that firewalls shall not be created as considered as creating separate buildings. The only reason that would be in there is because that's in addition to what State Fire Marshal standards are. I'm not sure why it wouldn't be reasonable to go with the State Fire Marshal standard on something like that. On L 104.1.3, there's been a back and forth discussion on this. Has to do with the fact that sprinkler systems for Group R occupancies, exceptions to or reductions in code requirements are not allowed. In other words, no mitigation for fire sprinklers, especially, that would mean applying to retrofit situations. Again, I don't know why State Fire Marshal code standards would not apply on that matter. And finally, there's a statement about L 105.1 general area separation firewalls used to create fire areas less than 5,000 square feet, for which the original application for permit under which the building was constructed shall be maintained as approved area separation firewalls with no openings. So I guess it means that you can't have a properly rated fire door with fire closure, perhaps tied to your central signaling system. What I'm trying to say is that in my mind, the Appendix L has the issue of A, can you really justify the benefit cost overall? And B, I would argue that there's certain elements of flexibility that are removed, that are in the state code in terms of flexibility, that are removed by the VCFD proposal, that if we stayed with their recommendation for triggering retrofit fire sprinkling, we could perhaps still delete certain sections to allow greater flexibility. So I just wanted to offer my thinking as to where I'm at as I'm struggling here as chair to find out where the center of gravity is for this group as to what we were going to want to recommend to the council. So, Board Member Hanson?
Just briefly put, it seems to me that the cost outweighs the benefits, and I appreciate a difference of opinion on whether or not fire sprinklers save lives. But I really think that with some modification to Appendix L, I would be willing to go forward with it, but as it reads just bluntly, I am not at this time willing to go forward.
Board Member Hilger.
I think on this issue, the public really has already spoken because anyone can put fire sprinklers in their home, and for the good reasons and the bad, but cost is certainly a factor. And I think all the meetings that I've been to and with the board, to hear someone from the fire department say the cost would be around $2,000 never seemed real. And with the information provided last time and this time, it clearly isn't real. It's very expensive. I think the major fire threat in Ojai, proven over the years, is from without the home. And I think that's what people have thought about. Anyway, thank you.
Continuing on, Board Member Daddy?
I'm going to regress a little bit.
Oh, boy.
And I'd like you to go back one more time on 3.2. L 103.3.1 addition. I want you to go back in on that 750 square foot portion, saying that And explain to me again where the fire sprinklers are going to be required on.
We've asked the question of the fire department, and we've gotten an answer. I'm just reading the plain language on that. When you read it, what do you see?
Well, would you read that again one more time?
Okay.
Because what I read was, it's going to trigger fire sprinklers at a different threshold than I had an expectation that it was.
All right, let me read it again, and we'll get some help understanding it. L103.3.1 additions. Any existing building with less than 701 square feet of floor area, 701 gross square feet for Group R3 occupancies, previously exempt from fire sprinklers, that would have been required to mitigate fire flow, access requirements, or distance to a fire station at the time the building permit was issued, shall provide fire sprinklers within the entire building when any addition to the building brings the total square footage over the previously exempt amount of 700 square feet, regardless of the percent of the addition. And my point being, let's say that something is 699 square feet. Does that mean that 3 square feet triggers requiring fire sprinklers for everything again?
And so would your point be that you would want to exempt that?
My
for
point
the
is,
3
I think
square feet?
I think that perhaps the phrase, if we did go the modification route, if that's the center of gravity here in this board's recommendation, I would argue that the phrase, regardless of the percent of the addition, be changed to a small percentage, like 5 or 10%.
Okay.
So we don't get an unintended consequence that nobody
My
thinks is
intended
reasonable.
consequences, because of access or distance away, that there probably should be no exemption. And if they were exempted once and they added anything, I think there's a reason
Okay.
that they really should be required to sprinkler that whole thing.
Okay.
Because one-way street, narrow streets, 10 miles, 15 miles away from fire department, I think there's for those,
understand.
that particular group of people, which is not on the valley floor in a regular tract, those outliers, there's a reason they need that protection more than anybody. So it's my opinion.
I understand that point.
Okay, thank you for reading that again. I wanted to make sure I understood it.
Well, I wanted to make sure I was reading it properly, so. Would you like to, Mr. Daddy, I mean, we're kind of, I think we have two sort of leaning to modification or denial here in terms of recommendation. In terms of Board Member Hanson and myself, I think
Okay, I'll make a
trying to figure
statement.
out where we might stand in terms of coming to a motion here.
I would, just so you understand where I'm coming from, if any part of a building is going to require sprinklers, it would be, in my opinion, that they totally need to retrofit.
So I'm going to
Just protecting one portion, I don't believe is adequate. If it's necessary to have it at all, it's necessary to have it for all.
So where do you stand on this?
What I would say is, if it's, we either reject or we modify to include the whole thing, just like I said.
We can't do that.
Well, then.
We can't increase the stringency. That's not allowed.
That's correct, but I'm not sure that's what Mr. Daddy said.
That's not allowed for,
If we wanted to adopt more stringent requirements than in here, we have to adopt, we can do that. We do it by adopting an ordinance amendment to the municipal code.
That would be a recommendation, agenda item 5, for the council to.
that would stay away from L. We're just talking about L. So I would say, okay.
On L, we can't
Are you
add.
taking a straw poll then for a vote?
Well,
Is that what you're-
I'm trying to,
Then
I
what
think
I
it's
would-
appropriate for us to try to kind of figure out what our majority opinion is here.
My
Yes.
opinion would be to reject L as though it's written and go to 5 and modify and add some extra stringency.
Board Member Hilger?
I would vote to reject L.
Thank you. We're not voting, but we're trying to figure out what we might be, where we might be on recommendation as a board.
you know,
Yeah, my recommendation would be to reject it, make some modifications.
okay. Mr. Fletcher?
Mr. Chairman, let me clarify Mr. Farmer's statement. We can make, or let me ask you a question. Do you want to make modifications to make it more stringent?
No, less stringent.
Okay, so then, so you can modify it to make it less stringent. The chairman's comment about the 700 square foot building and putting a threshold in it. A more lenient threshold for retrofitting based on, net new square footage. Maybe, I'm just, maybe the change in use language.
Examples, yes.
Yeah, so actually you can, if you want to make it, if you just don't want to require sprinklers, then you reject. If you want a more stringent requirement than what's in Appendix L, I guess rejection is the right remedy. If you think you want to just make changes to make this more lenient, really then your preference would be to amend, to modify it.
Mm-hmm.
Just want to clarify, because reject and modify is only, I think it's Mr. Daddy's approach.
So there's three,
To reject, modify, or accept.
Or yeah, and
yeah, so my suggestion would be to modify it then.
And we are, again, I want to reiterate, we're solely recommending to council here. We are, we have no, it was delegated to us to evaluate for a recommendation, and I'm pushing as chair that we get there tonight. Okay?
Yeah, and my point of the modification is strictly from a cost. I mean, there's no doubt that fire sprinklers save lives. It's just that I'm just not in agreement on the cost for this retrofitting of some of the proposals in here from some of the contractors. Having been in the banking business for about 40 years and handling over 30 of those years construction loans in the valley, I know what construction costs are, and when you go back to retrofit a house, especially a two-story house, you get into quite a bit of expenses.
So could I kind of ask you to clarify then, where do you stand on Appendix L? Do you want to, how would you like to modify it, or as opposed to recommending rejection? With respect to the existing construction?
Yeah, mine would be to exclude the existing residents.
Exclude existing construction.
Right.
So, just to clarify, so that if there was an addition that met if the addition met the standard of Appendix L, we'd say, okay, go ahead and fire sprinkle the new construction, but not the old construction.
Right, exactly.
Okay. Okay. I'm waiting to hear wisdom from staff here. What? All right. Okay. Yes. Okay, it can be real quick about it.
Just to give you some technical information, if you're going to make a decision, is that because residential sprinklers are designed with a two-head flow, they're designed to work to catch a fire in its incipient stage. It goes off very quickly to put the fire out. If you're going to recommend that you have a sprinklered portion of a building and a non-sprinklered portion of the building, it doesn't work very good in residences, because if the fire starts in the non-sprinklered portion, it's going to overwhelm the sprinklered protection because there just isn't enough water available. Okay. If you wanted to increase, I mean, look at the numbers. The district's recommending over 1,000 square feet is what retrofits. If you've got somebody with a 700 or 800 square foot house and they add 2,000 square feet, you don't think that they should comply with the new requirements, then exempt them. But maybe you should increase the values if you think 1,000 is too restrictive. But just to say no restrictions, I think is going too far.
I understand.
Yeah. Thank you.
In other words, the distinction between the existing and new is not really a constructive distinction, in your opinion.
For the effectiveness of residential sprinklers with the two-head sprinkler design, it's going to cause problems with the
Can I ask you,
system.
while you're there, another question then, your opinion? The threshold for commercial is less, 25% compared to 50 in Appendix L. Is there a rationale for that being so much lower than 50%? I mean, what would be the issue with having it be the same percentage for residential and commercial?
I don't know.
Okay.
Can I make a statement on that?
I think those numbers have kind of evolved over the years based on what's acceptable for people and what isn't.
Yeah.
It's been around for a long time, and that's kind of where they're at.
Thank you.
Chair,
Mr. Daddy.
I think we're talking about two different things.
Mhm.
One is life safety, one is property.
Yes.
There's no expectation that there's going to be somebody sleeping in the furniture store.
Correct.
And so that is what I believe why it's evolved into two different areas.
But that doesn't,
Property versus
that
life.
doesn't explain the lower percentage, more stringent percentage for commercial as opposed to residential.
Property.
I understand. Okay. All right.
No, I'm just looking at the picture.
Okay. Again, here, as chair, I'm gonna try to push us to a recommendation here, all right? And it seems to me that it's between, and correct me if I'm wrong, the recommendation that we have a majority vote for will either be to recommend rejection of Appendix L or to accept, or to modify.
Yes.
I don't hear anyone wishing to accept it as presented in terms of the recommendation to the council.
Are you
Is that
looking for a
correct or
motion?
incorrect?
Are you looking for a motion?
I am.
I would make a motion that, given this current set of circumstances and what we're doing, that we reject L and move to 5.
I'll second that.
Discussion?
Yeah, discussion. I think what we need to do is we have a lot of issues that are, we need more recommendations than the sprinklers. Again, I would be for going to 5 and modifying. I don't believe you can just sprinkle a portion of a building and get any value out of it. If you're gonna do it, do it. If it's important enough to have the sprinklers, let's go ahead and do it. And that, by the way, is current standards where you sprinkler closets.
I want to go ahead. I tried to be prepared for every eventuality.
And I think we need to.
And I since this motion is on the table.
Yes.
Part of the responsibility of the local agency is to provide a rationale for denial. And so I took upon myself to think of, if that's where everybody was, this might be one idea of a rationale to accompany our recommendation. I'm going to pass that out and see what everybody thinks. This will be part of the public record, obviously, if adopted. I'll read it. Part Roman numeral 2 would be, this is again, I didn't know what was really going to happen tonight, but to me, if the general opinion was to reject, what would be the argument for doing that in terms of recommendation? And I listed 4 that came to my mind. Provisions are general over the entire VCFD district and not actually specific to City of Ojai conditions. Benefits do not outweigh costs, especially for small commercial development. Codes mandated by the State Fire Marshal are quite stringent and well vetted for general application as contained in Title 24. Projected numbers of actual properties affected are quite small based on recent history, quite easily leading to disparate impacts on certain property owners without clear improvement in overall public safety. And I just offering that is if, because we are supposed to provide a rationale, and I thought I would offer that for discussion if the motion got to this point. So we're discussing rejection and rationale as part of rejection on the recommendation. Go ahead.
Well, I put out a motion. Do we have a second? And a second?
Yeah, we were discussing the motion. Yeah. And we could amend the motion if we want to include a rationale. I'd welcome such a thing. I mean, we have a second on the motion to recommend denial of Appendix L to the council.
Right.
And then what I'm just saying is that the charge to the city, if it, and I think it's incumbent upon our responsibility, is if that's what we vote, it should be based on a rationale.
Well, then what I would say is part of the rationale is we should work with local fire department and make some recommendations, because I believe we all think that within this community, we need to increase fire codes.
Okay.
We need to increase from C to A roof class standards.
So with
we
this-
need to do a number of things, and I would say then reject L, and within 60 days, work with our fire people and volunteers that have showed up.
On a substitute.
On some type of a committee workshop between us and come up with a recommendation for a list of all of those other ideas that we think where we need to tighten the code, increase the code.
Let me make one comment on that, and I want to make sure, and Mr. Fletcher, Mr. Stewart will correct me, Ms. Wall will correct me if I'm wrong. Part of the record so far is that if we wanted, and the city council accepted, stringencies in excess of Ordinance 28, that responsibility for that enforcement would be within the city of Ojai.
And we'd be responsible for the.
Would we have to draw up a new ordinance?
It'd have to be a new ordinance, and it
If
would
I
have
could-
to be, the responsibility would be, enforcement responsibility would be within the city of Ojai. That's my understanding for anything in more stringent than Ordinance 28.
Yeah,
I think so.
that's my understanding also, unless the fire department chose to.
So that's part of what we would be recommending. I just want to be clear on that.
Mr. Chairman, if I could clarify the process here. You have two items, and I think you want to avoid blurring your agenda items, because we have the statutory obligation under the code to react to Appendix L.
Yes.
So,
and to provide a rationale.
And it's been pretty clear on the record, some of the rationale behind
Okay.
behind it. That's fine. And actually, drafting up something is wonderful. Lawyers like things like that. But
Not necessary then.
no, I mean it's good. I was just saying that the whether or not to adopt the recommend adoption of or ratification of Appendix L regarding sprinklering, I guess with all due respect, has little bearing to other issues such as roof standards, and I'm not making sure that you're not.
I've been trying to draw that distinction
I hope this
tonight,
not be
yes.
used as some sort of a
Correct.
bargaining issue here, that you really need to address them as two, and you've got two separate agenda items, and dealing with the question of residential sprinkler standards is one, and then additional, more stringent fire code standards and building fire safety standards is a separate issue. They don't have to, they wouldn't be parallel. I mean, they wouldn't be combined as to one process.
And correct, and I would completely agree with Mr. Fletcher. We would move on to another agenda item after this one's decided for recommendation, and that discussion would be part of the next agenda item. Okay? All right, so we have a motion on the table. It's been seconded. I guess, Mr. Fletcher, your opinion is that there's no need to really amend the motion to include rationale?
Well, you could invite the maker and the seconder to adopt Roman 2 on your proposed alternative motions.
If you so wish.
If you're so inclined to do so.
If you don't want to, I won't feel offended.
I am not, because there are other items on here that are not listed.
Okay, I understand.
As part of the rationale.
If that's the case, then I assume we could go ahead with a vote on the recommendation without amendment, unless there are any other comments.
I have a comment with regards to the motion.
Okay.
Let me speak or not?
Real quick.
Okay. It just seems to me that most of the dissent or concern has been with regards to retrofitting. And with the motion for disapproval, you're also affecting any new commercial buildings. Because the fire district ordinance is the only thing that triggers sprinklers for new commercial buildings. So you could get a commercial building, a 20,000 square foot commercial building that wouldn't get sprinkled because the state doesn't require it. The fire district's ordinance does. And so if the concern really is over retrofitting, I guess I would encourage you to not disapprove the whole ordinance, but perhaps modify it and just eliminate the requirements for retrofitting.
Mm-hmm. It gets complicated.
I'm looking. And again, this is a recommendation. Comments?
Yeah, well, we have a 10,000 square foot building limit, so that's where we're going to be in this town. We're never going to exceed that. I guess my comments is I don't believe L fits the purpose for Ojai. And the fire marshal did tell us that Ojai kind of led the way by doing things our own way, and I think we need to do our things the own way. I think what we need is a custom ordinance that fits us in the wildland interface, that doesn't fit a number of the communities that this thing blankets.
And I
We
guess.
need to tailor it for the safety of this city.
And so that would be, for example, agenda item 5, if we wanted to, we could certainly move on to discussing that after we vote on this recommendation. Issues like the commercial sprinkling could be certainly included in that. Okay. All right, well, I think I've been trying to be very careful here to try to get everybody's chance to express themselves, and I believe we are ready for a vote on the recommendation, the simple motion.
As
Quote the motion again. State it again.
You want to restate it? Sorry.
Board Member Daddy made the motion. Board Member Hilgers seconded to recommend to the City Council to reject and deny the attached resolution, the Ventura County Fire Protection District Ordinance Number 28, Appendix L.
Thank you for a clear statement. Ready to vote?
Board Member Daddy?
Yes.
Board Member Hilgers?
Yes.
Vice Chair Farmer?
Yes.
Chair Wyrick?
Yes.
Board Member Hanson?
Yes.
Okay. Now, let's test everyone's patience and move on to 5. I want to make an opening statement about this. Sherry, was I out of turn with that? Okay. I want to say something about 5 because I want to say that I have become very educated and still getting educated about the whole issue of the special situation in the city of Ojai. And there are a number of, there is no other city in Ventura County that has the wildland-urban interface that we have, that I'm aware of. No other city that has the level of heavy tree cover, close to natural, undeveloped wildland landscapes on all sides. I was struck by Harrison and Sons at a council meeting recently stating that the city of Ojai has the highest level of green waste of any service area in their region. And so we have some special problems. We have these special one-way streets. It's not just Signal Street. We also have some up on the top of Park Road and Daly Road. Just to cut to the chase of where my thinking has come is that I was reading the rationale for a Assembly Bill 1867 that's currently in the state legislature, which is to extend the exemption for clearance for defensible spaces up to 300 feet without having to have special permits for timber removal and so on. The idea to expand it. And they cited in that bill that's before the Natural Resource Committee that I believe just got reported out of that committee in this session right now, that there is a program called the Firewise Communities Program. And so I started looking into this because the Firewise Communities Program specifically in a very precise way, works with the local fire department jurisdiction, and 2, it specifies guidelines for up to 200 feet of progressive removal and thinning with extensions up to 300 feet or beyond based on special local conditions. They have a procedure where they will work with local groups to develop Firewise community proposals. They'll work with the local fire department. The difference from the Ready, Set, Go program seem to be very specific, some specific differences in Firewise communities. By the way, 1,030 jurisdictions in 41 states have already joined this program. with relative to the Ready, Set, Go program for the special conditions of Ojai, there's more detailed structure measures, more detailed stipulations for clearance and thinning measures at different ranges, 100 feet, 200 feet plus, ongoing site evaluations from specialists, guidance for creating local boards or committees, and again, emphasis on hardening of structures, preventing loss beyond what's simply necessary to ensure fire apparatus access. I think that there's a lot of specific things we could talk about with 5, but what I am going to ask my fellow board members to suggest to council is that perhaps council appoint us to look into, and I have that motion written there. I'm going to put a suggested motion out here that the building board ask the city council to task us with contacting the National Fire Protection Association for guidance in creating a Firewise board or committee for the purpose of developing a Firewise community plan, and then reporting back to the council the proposal for proceeding with this. Again, it's not the substitute for the Ventura County Fire District. They pointedly supplement, but they supplement in a way that specializes in wildland urban interfaces with the local fire protection districts. And I think that's exactly what we need. And so I'm going to suggest that we certainly have everyone talk about some specific extra things that we feel we need in our ordinance, but that perhaps that's a direction to go to get for an organized procedure for developing that specific recommendation. So with that, I know I jumped ship out there and said what I had to say right off the bat, but it's time for others to weigh in on what they think.
Sounds like a good
And
idea.
before I do that, I forgot, are there any members of the audience that like to speak to agenda number 5? I have no speaker cards.
Wayne Maynard, Gridley Road. And I encourage you to recommend to the city that they specifically adopt a city building code and address many of these issues for hardening structures in wildland areas. I know that in your municipal code, there's, from the last time the city did adopt a building code, there's a provision there that precludes all wood roofs.
Right.
And that's no longer enforceable.
Right.
And so those kind of provisions, I think, are important. When you look at wildland fire safety and the urban interface, it's a systems approach. Right. It's a systems approach looking at vegetation management, brush clearance, looking at hardening the structures, looking at providing access and water supplies. And so all of those have to be addressed. And if you have a weakness in one, then you have to kind of harden the others,
right.
Okay, or strengthen the others. So it is a system-wide approach, and I would encourage the city to adopt a city building code and include some of these provisions that will help those buildings in the area.
Yeah, and my only comment was I think that there's some outside assistance that can supplement the Ventura County Fire District in terms of coming up with some specific issues, some specific stringencies in excess of what is required by the Ventura County District.
Okay.
That might be very appropriate.
All right, that was my comment. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'd like to, and I would like to have the chair talk to our fire chief, and I would like the fire chief to give us some recommendations of current or past.
Not exhaustive list tonight.
No, not tonight, but current or past
Yeah.
residents. I'm really specifically residents that understand this place, understand where we are, understand that when you go up Signal, Park is the last getaway. There's no more getaway up the street. And understand where we have some specific issues and come up with, again, tailored things that we need and we need to adopt. And let's figure out where we can do this, and not just for the new. We're pretty good on the new. But when people go to modify, and I would like us to take a look at the Pasadena, this June 14th, all wood roofs within the city of Pasadena must be removed. Sooner or later, we're going to have to face the facts that we cannot have these things and expect to keep this place, because it's only going to take the one fire.
With the right conditions. Chief?
Yeah, Norm Plott with the Ventura County Fire Department. Thank you, members of the Appeals Board. Yeah, we met on Saturday, April 12th, with the Ojai Fire Safe Council and talked a little bit about some of the things that we could do. We have the Ojai fuel break that goes across the top that hasn't been maintained, in the next section that goes basically from Foothill over across Shelf Road and then down to Gridley. So those are first line defense that provides protection to the city that we could work on along with the Forest Service and get those fuel breaks built back in, and those are definitely some things. I do know that the Forest Service has been working with the Ojai trail crew to do some fuel modifications on the Middle Ridge, which is the ridge behind Ojai that you see that there's some brake work that's been in the past. I personally worked on the Fairview Foothill fuel brake, walked every stretch of that dirt at one time, and we did a lot of cut and pile burning, and it's just grown back over time. So that's definitely something. And I talked with Will with the Ojai Fire Safe Council, and we looked at those two are actually in their plan to work on grants and that sort of thing. I know that Bob Daddy and I have spoke about some of the trees and that have died and that are still on private property, and that's definitely within the scope of code enforcement that could be talk to the property owner to have those trees removed so the fire hazard is removed once they have died, whether it's beetle kill or whatever it's done. Like Wayne Maynard said, it is a systems approach, and I think Mr. Wyrick mentioned too, is that the Firewise movement. And I was at the WUI conference in Reno this year, and they talked a lot about Firewise communities and how it's a community approach to multifaceted.
Right.
We did do a 17-acre fuel modification on the Cortona property here about 2 years ago, 18 months ago, where we went in and modified. And, if you drove that today, you would look over there, you'd never know that 17 acres had been modified in that fuel bed. But it had, and there's some ways that we do it with skirting and that sort of thing and mulching, and so that to the eye it looks like it always did. But we actually modified 17 acres in that fuel bed 18 months ago. So those are definitely approaches. The other thing is that I bring to your attention is that after the Cedar Fire, Ventura County Fire Chief Bob Roper at the time was one of the members on the Blue Ribbon Commission on how to do it right. And one of the things that came out of the Blue Ribbon Commission is pointing back toward Ventura County as a model for what it looks like when it's done well. And if you look at the structure loss in Ventura County compared to our neighbors to the south and to the north of us, it's quite amazing the difference between Ventura County, both to our neighbors to the south and neighbors to the north, on the amount of structures that are lost in those communities. And part of it is that Ventura County early on, over 30 years ago, got on the bandwagon Captain Maynard at the time was in fire prevention and worked on those ordinances for, making modifications to new construction, boxing in eaves in fire hazard areas. So we too would recommend, a Firewise community support the Ojai Fire Safe Council and their efforts, and would be willing to work to do what we can. But I would say that there are things within the city that they can do through code enforcement on the infill or in the inner areas of the city that could be done to take care of some of the concerns that I know that Bob Daddy has raised to me. So,
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you so much for educating me about the Cortona situation. I can't tell you how many times I've driven by that in the middle of the summer going, oh my God, what could happen over there?
180 acres.
Yes.
So it is it's
Yes.
the largest property within the size of the city.
So, it's getting late. I'm going to, see if there's other discussion, and I'm going to offer a motion. I think I can as a chair if I want to. Are there other comments on agenda item 5? If not, I'm just going to. I think we got a very positive response about the idea of a Firewise community program, community-based from the chief. And I would like to make Roman numeral 4 in the handout as a motion. If I can get a second.
I second it.
Yeah, we'll work with it.
It's a means of organizing, I think, all the concerns that have been expressed.
I second.
Okay?
Yeah, we got 2 seconds.
I guess then it's time for a roll call vote.
Board Member Daddy?
Yes.
Board Member Hilgers?
Yes.
Vice Chair Farmer?
Yes.
Chair Wyrick?
Yes.
Vice Chair Board Member Hanson?
And with that, I believe we are ready for adjournment. There is nothing on the agenda for future agenda items. I overlooked that, but I don't see the need for that unless there's a burning matter. We have a recommendation for further action. We'll see if the council is receptive to that action item. And with that, I believe we are adjourned. Thank you very much for everybody's patience. Did okay?
No.
I was trying to get everybody.